Good morning. First, my name is Lee Hart, and I am the Executive Director of the Alaska Outdoor Alliance. And I'm very excited to be here, even more virtually than usual, through this video. And I want to start by saying, um, giving a big thank you to Penny Cordis for the invitation to participate in this final session of the OLE program, Set in Stone: The Enduring Legacy of the Civilian Conservation Corps. I was so honored when Penny asked me to participate, and then incredibly sorry that a change in schedule makes it impossible for me to be here in person today. But I did prepare this video of the comments I would have made had I been with all of you. So I'd like to start out by telling you a little bit about myself. So I have a 20-year career in the outdoor bike, snow sports, and adventure travel industries before I moved to Alaska in the 2011-2012 season. Back in 2016, I seeded what became the Alaska Outdoor Alliance, which formally launched as the Alaska Outdoor Alliance brand just a little over a year ago. We are the voice of the $2.2 billion outdoor recreation economy in Alaska, which makes us the 7th largest outdoor recreation economy in the United States. We are comprised of a big tent of interests and stakeholders. So our group represents enthusiasts in summer and winter sports, motorized and non-motorized, retailers, manufacturers, educators, public health professionals, and a variety of allied nonprofit trail and conservation groups. So our goal is to strengthen Alaska's outdoor recreation economic sector. And one of the main ways we do that is by educating and advocating with elected leaders at the state and federal level for measures that strengthen Alaska's outdoor recreation economy. Since the pandemic, we have been hyper-focused on jobs, which dovetails quite nicely to today's discussion of an update and renewal of the Civilian Conservation Corps program. So just a few weeks ago, as part of its $2 trillion infrastructure package, the Biden administration asked Congress to provide $10 billion to get a climate conservation corps off the ground. No pun intended. A spokesman at the time said that President Biden knows that a civilian conservation corps is going to be instrumental in tackling climate change and creating good jobs, putting people to work, restoring public lands and waters, planting trees, and improving access to parks. There are many benefits to conservation corps, and especially this kind of new vision and the different issues and projects that it will tackle. So there we go. Sorry. One moment, please. Get my screen share to cooperate. There we go. Okay, there. So I did provide this slide for you to take a look at that. There's 5 silos: land management, conservation, economic improvements, community based types of projects, and of course, really tying back to the original Civilian Conservation Corps concept is workforce development. So under land management, some of the new things we're talking about include wildfire control, as climate change has exacerbated wildfire seasons across the West and Alaska and beyond. Invasive species management and habitat restoration. In conservation, they put kind of my world, the outdoor recreation world, sort of falls under the conservation silo, and that includes improving trails, increasing land and water accessibility, and creating new parks and green spaces. On the economic side, you can expect the Corps to be working on developing cost-effective programs for climate resiliency, rural economic development programs. USDA rural development has been quite big on recognizing the value of outdoor recreation to diversify and strengthen and bolster rural economies. And then the Conservation Corps can also contribute billions to outdoor recreation direct industries. That can be tourism. It can be, again, manufacturing, which we have a small but really very uniquely Alaskan manufacturing sector here. And then moving on to another silo, which is community. You see some of the projects listed there. And then workforce development, which includes creating a large green workforce, professional development, and specialized skill development, which again is just part and parcel of what was so cool about the CCC program back during the New Deal after the Great Depression. So what's going on in all of this? And so it's, everything's moving fast. I can tell you that, of course, when the Biden administration first took office, their number one priority was getting the COVID pandemic under control, and then shoring up our economic situation, which had been so devastated by the pandemic. So now they're on to, now they're looking at, so that's why it's taking a little while to get to some of the rollouts of some of these other programs. But the good news is 3 bills have already passed, a couple of them before the Biden administration took office, and then 6 are under consideration in Congress right now. So the 3 that passed, I'll take this in chronological order, and they include in 2019, the Don Dingell Jr. Conservation Management and Recreation Act. And that act encouraged federal agencies to expand the use of the core network, which is, again, sort of a updated version of the CCC, but also expanded that to include another federal agency, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Then during the pandemic in March, the Trump administration created and released funds from the CARES Act. And Alaska really led the way on using those funds to create local-based conservation corps to get Alaskans back to work on projects that benefit outdoor recreation, both for the benefit of local residents as well as creating infrastructure that can attract visitors from around the world to stay another day and things like that. So we'll talk in more detail about those 3 programs in Alaska that totaled nearly $6 billion or $6 million. And but first I'll finish talking about these bills. So after the CARES Act, later in the summer, Congress, with all 3 of our congressional delegation, voted overwhelmingly in support of something called the Great American Outdoors Act. And the benefit of that is that it begins to address, it devotes 5 years of funding to addressing the maintenance backlog on federal lands, which is Forest Service, BLM, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and to some degree NOAA, or National Atmospheric and Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The other part of that is that of the Great American Outdoors Act is that it provided full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Now that's a fund that's been around since about the 60s, and it is a fund commonly used and much sought after because it doubles your money. So for every dollar that a local community spends on a particular outdoor infrastructure project, they're eligible through a grant process to receive a matching dollar from the LWCF fund. So it's one of several very key grants that our communities go after to fund projects, close to home projects, and put people to work. So then we come to bills that are pending. And I think the best news about this is that there's a lot of them. So that means that tells me that there's a lot of our congressional leadership thinking about this issue and seeing the promise of it. So I'll run through those very quickly, and that includes Senate Bill 3624 from Delaware Senator Chris Coons. Kind of unwieldy name. It's the Pandemic Response and Opportunity Through National Service Act. And that proposed to fund 750,000 national service jobs over 3 years. But that was kind of like just really, it didn't have bipartisan support until Senator Coons connected with Roger Wicker from Mississippi, and they collectively introduced Senate Bill 3964, which is the CORE Act, which provides for, which has bipartisan support for a scaled down version of the last bill I just mentioned, which would provide funding for 250,000 instead of 750,000 people. But with the bipartisan support, obviously that's, that puts your thumb on the scale for possible passage. Then Senate Bill 3684 from Colorado Rep. Joe Neguse is the 21st Century Conservation Corps for Our Health and Our Jobs Act. And this highlights pathways for increasing and cementing federal funding for a civilian conservation corps. Then Senate Democrats Ron Wyden from Oregon and Cory Booker from New Jersey combined to create Senate Bill 4434, which is the 21st, sorry, that's kind of redundant here. Let's see, maybe, no, it's a different bill. Anyway, I have the name wrong and I apologize for that. But anyway, they're proposing $9 billion of Department of Labor monies to fund qualified land conservation corps and scale up for workforce training. I think it's a companion bill to that 21st Century Act that Joe Neguse has. And then finally, well, not finally, two more. Senate Bill 4538 is the Renew, with Renew in all caps, Conservation Corps Act. And that creates a new conservation corps through the Department of Interior and US Department of Agriculture that authorizes $55 billion over 5 years to put 1 million Americans to work to address the backlog of deferred conservation projects. Then finally, HR 1634 over on the House side from Florida Representative Frederica Wilson has the Youth Corps Act. And this bill authorizes the Department of Labor to make grants to public or private nonprofit agencies or organizations to carry out youth corps programs that utilize the youth corps model to provide low-income youth 16 to 24 years of age with education and work readiness training. So again, a lot of different takes on how to modernize the CCC concept, and especially with this eye on getting people back to work on restoring conservation assets, again, trails, hut systems, boat launches, trailheads for parking for hunters and anglers and all of that. Because I forgot to mention that the sportsmen's groups are also part of our big tent. And so we track some other bills like the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Act and the Dingell-Johnson Sportfish Restoration Act, because those help put in infrastructure specific to creating better access for hunting and fishing. Right now I'm focused more on the non-hunting and fishing side, but we do keep our eyes on that and track that. And I could go into some other details about that, but it's not really related to the core. So so why is this that people are so excited about it? And I'll tell you that the numbers make sense. it adds up, no pun intended. So a study by the National Park Service found that every dollar invested in national parks returns, national parks infrastructure, returns $10 to the economy. So outdoor recreation, we know that outdoor recreation opportunities increase economic activity through spending, employment, increased property taxes, property values, I should say, of properties in close proximity to national parks, of course, tourism, lodging, and tax revenues. This activity is especially important for economic development in the many rural gateway communities that are in close proximity to our national parks. So, so 1 to 10 is your return on investment in National Park Service projects, and then Voices for National Service, all kinds of different corps, found that for every dollar invested in national service programs like AmeriCorps, AmeriCorps seniors, youth corps, all that kind of stuff, for every dollar invested in service corps, $17 is returned in social benefits to the community. And this is where I wanted to segue. It felt like a natural place to segue into a discussion of what happened in our communities in Alaska last year when they enacted Civilian Conservation Corps kinds of programs. So I'll start with Sitka. They had the smallest amount of dollars advocated, but you'll hear in a second, the return was astounding. So it was Sitka Assembly allocated $300,000 for a community conservation corps that hired 9 people, which in a small place like Sitka is important, at approximate wages ranging between $25 and $35 an hour, and included several nonprofit partners to make these projects come to life, which included Sitka Trailworks, the U.S. Forest Service isn't a nonprofit, but it was a partner, the City of Sitka, Division of State Parks, and Spruce Root project of Southeast Sustainable Partnership. So some of the projects they did, like they got through a list of some of the let's call it hardcore outdoor recreation projects, and then they offered the crew to the city to help on deferred maintenance project priorities for the city. And so one of those that I thought was super cool was that they restored a historic Presbyterian cemetery. And when they brushed out, they brushed it out and kind of gussied it up, and they had to fell some trees that were presenting hazards to the public. And when they felled those trees, they took the usable firewood from them, partnered with the Alaska Native Brotherhood to get that firewood to local elders for the winter. So I thought that was, again, like big social return on that investment. This crew in Sitka also renovated the Tom Young cabin, which is a high-use, public-use cabin maintained by the city of Sitka. They did not do this. This crew worked hard. It was not easy work that they did. In this case, for the cabin, they designed, manufactured, and installed a new cedar outhouse, repaired door jambs, cleaned gutters, and old section, repaired decaying sections of the redwood deck, or of the wooden deck. Sorry, it wasn't redwood. They also, there's some amazing pictures of this group working in like practically chest deep water as they repaired a cold water system at a popular hot springs in the area called Goddard Hot Springs. And so here again, we're seeing where this money trickles out and benefits the even more people in the community than the 9 individual crew members. So you had landscape architects and engineers who had designed a new cold water storage dam at the hot springs. And these Corps members hauled 1,500 pounds of lumber through difficult terrain in obnoxious weather conditions, demolished the existing dam, excavated the pond, which is a pretty mucky affair, constructed a new wooden dam, and installed a liner. That project and the one before both made the local newspaper for its impact. Then again, partnering with some more local nonprofits, which included the Sitka Cycling Club, Sitka Trailworks, and Southeast Alaska Independent Living. The trail crew built a mountain bike trail. Sitka starting to put in a number of mountain bike trails. And the materials used for the trails were purchased or rented from local businesses, again, keeping money in the community. They did some other trail improvements. In one place, they cleaned up over 400 pounds of trash on public, or collectively over 400 pounds of trash on public lands. They also had time to begin planning stages for multiple other longer range projects, including a very cool project called the Sitka Sound Coastal Trail from Kanga to Big Bay. So a canoe or kayak trail off the coast of Sitka. And then they also developed a local timber drying shed for a Sitka high school construction program. So, I mean, $300,000, that money just recirculated and echoed around the community in such positive ways. It was pretty impressive, especially when it's concentrated like that. And it's very obvious to the local residents that something is, this effort is being really stepped up. So then I'll take it to Anchorage, where they had, Anchorage Assembly allocated $4.5 million, but they split that between some forest health projects to eliminate beetle-killed spruce to mitigate wildfire risks for coming seasons, as well as recreational trails project, doing both forestry health and rec trails projects in Anchorage, Girdwood, Eagle River, as well as a separate indigenous wayfinding signage along, I believe, the coastal trail. So just one quote from all of that is that from Anchorage Assemblyman Chris Constant, who re-emphasized that the reason that Anchorage allocated the funds that way, and they caught a little bit of heat for it from other groups who thought that that money should go, to other, there's plenty of need during the pandemic, right? But so what Chris Constant said was, what's actually going on here is we're investing in people who want to earn a living, training them, and providing them with linkage to future job opportunities where they have fundamentally basic training to get into the workforce. He said that public lands funding was perhaps the project he was most proud of in allocating CARES funding, adding that while the benefits are primarily to the workers, the improvement of public lands will have lasting effects. And finally, the last community I want to talk about is Juneau, where they allocated $1 million. They were actually the first community in Alaska to use CARES Act funding this way. They spent $1 million, which hired over 50 people in a pay range between $19 and $23 an hour on projects, and it was a 3-part program. So they had some money went to the city and borough of Juneau's Parks and Rec department for their projects. Some money went to Eagle Crest ski area, which is owned by the city and borough of Juneau, their ski area there, and kind of some projects that helped make that more year-round by adding bike trails and some other features that are good for summer there. And then also Trailworks, which partners with the city and borough of Juneau as sort of their de facto trails work crew anyway. But they had separate projects from the city and borough of Juneau. So when Juneau started this trend, the way it happened was Alaska Outdoor Alliance had recommended a job stimulus package to our delegation in order to get Alaskans back to work. And we sent that to the delegation back in April. And it's, obviously, so then Juneau, Sitka, and Anchorage picked up on this thing, which all of them had signed on to a letter to the delegation supporting this concept and others, like passage of the Great American Outdoors Act and a litany of other things that we felt would really help get people back to work. So as you can imagine, I mean, Southeast is probably from a tourism perspective, the hardest hit part of Alaska during the pandemic because of the total closure of the cruise ship industry. So wait till you hear what Juneau did. So and this is just the Trailmix report. So from June to November last year, Trailmix, the nonprofit trails organization, employed 31 crew members who improved 3.8 miles on 10 separate trails within the community. And those projects, again, not easy projects, included installing new planks and gravel tread to improving drainage and all kinds of things to buff up the trail system. Trail crew members who worked a full season received an average of $16,275 in wages. 75% of the money Trailmix had was okay, wait, back up. So that was on the wage side. Then 75% of the non-payroll expenditures that Trailmix used for these projects went to local businesses through the purchase of supplies, helicopter time to lift supplies to these remote work areas, maintenance of trail equipment and so forth. Trailmix also spent over $18,000 on job training and certification fees that will help the crew members they hired be more employable and build their careers in the natural resources space. So I really liked this quote. I just recently did a press release about all this and included a quote from one of Trailmix crew members that said, "The CCC has prepared me to pursue my goal of working as a wilderness ranger or trail crew member for the National Parks and/or Forest Service. I learned to confidently make decisions under pressure and to make tough calls when necessary and take responsibility for myself and my crew." And then the Trailmix trail crew leader or executive director as well, Ryan O'Shaughnessy, said, "I'm proud of how we supported people in Juneau during the height of the pandemic, but this isn't mission accomplished. Alaskan communities all over the state could benefit from a workforce development program that invests in people, the land, and the economy." And then Ryan continues with a little bit of a nudge saying, that's why Governor Dunleavy should direct new federal funding to allow similar projects to be run across the state. So that's what happened locally last year. And it would be so fantastic if we can get that to continue again this year. Possibly there's a couple funding streams you could look at for that. Again, it'll depend on political will and the interest in getting people back to work and back on their feet and recovering from the economic hits. So what can this look like? So I was looking for you to share with you on some of the latest thinking that may or may not come to pass as the Climate Conservation Corps begins to take shape. But one group that put together an interesting proposition was a group called Evergreen, and it was founded by members of Washington Governor Jay Inslee's presidential campaign. Maggie Thomas, who is a co-founder of Evergreen, recently left that group to serve as chief of staff to Biden's domestic climate czar, Gina McCarthy. So I'm thinking that could be a good omen. The way Evergreen envisioned it, the new Climate Conservation Corps could be 5 times bigger than the CCC was, employing about 1.5 million Americans without the age cap or racial and gender restrictions that limited the original CCC. It would take on a much more expansive portfolio. I discussed that a little bit earlier in this conversation, including installing solar panels and wind turbines, maintaining public transit systems, retrofitting homes, and building up more energy efficiency. It also envisions that it could include Medicare health coverage, child care stipends, and partnerships with labor unions to provide pre-apprenticeship education to civilian Climate Conservation Corps enlistees. And also a far cry from the rustic work camps set up on federal lands during the 30s, which I'm sure you've talked about and have some great historic pictures of. The new plan aims to build modern federal campuses or offer rental vouchers for people to work near their work sites. Unlike CCC again, which Congress shuttered as World War II shrank the pool of available men. The new program would embed itself into the community fabric, so it's more sustainable, providing grants to existing local programs and partnering with civic organizations to serve long unmet neighborhood needs. So in kind of more self-determination from the communities as to what those corps would work on. Again, with climate and conservation goals top of mind. Echoing the New Deal Corps, the CCC would pay 20 times more to workers, at least 20 times more workers, 20 times more workers, at least $15 an hour, plus benefits, and provide a green careers network that would seek to train enrollees for permanent jobs and direct them to high-paying private employers. So one of the things that Evergreen left off of that was that some people are having conversations around is the agricultural piece. Another kind of addendum to that idea would be that CCC enrollees could, in a variety of ways, work to establish alternative farming strategies like vertical farming, small acreage farming, food, clean air, clean water, and well-tended soil that's essential for survival. So what are the chances of this plan, or like of even all of this coming together and into reality? Because it's going to take money to make it happen, right? So the program has proven in some polls to be wildly popular with the American public. Polling by the admittedly left-leaning but think tank Data for Progress said that among likely voters in October, 79% supported creating a civilian climate corps, including 78% of Democrats and 84% of Republicans. So bipartisan public support for this. Then you get to the halls of Washington, D.C., where you've got a couple of things going on. One is that there's some, the age of hyperpartisanship is upon us. We've already seen that the Republicans have no compunction with voting down things that are popular with the public. So can they overcome this? Can they see the value here and let that aside? And then on the other side, from the far left, or maybe not even the far left, but progressives are critical, saying that there's just not enough in here. It's too little to make a significant difference, and they would like to see more money. So somewhere in there in the middle, hopefully, are some answers. And we get something going. I think it's got its best chance that it's ever had right now. And I mean, you keep in mind that I think it said a lot that President Biden was in his first week behind the Oval Office desk and signed an executive order calling on Congress to create this climate conservation course. So that's in the first week, that's a big statement about where it falls in his priorities. We can hope, we can talk to our congressional delegation and let them know how we feel about that. We can talk to our legislators as they're contemplating ways to spend American Rescue Plan funds that will be coming into the state. We've got over like almost $2 billion that'll be coming to Alaska. Should we use some of that, just like we did with the CARES Act funding, to create more community-based conservation corps? I don't know. That's a question I ask you, and for you to talk amongst yourselves. And again, talk with your elected leaders, both at the municipal, borough, village, tribal, and state levels. Like, we have the information from last year that shows what an amazing success these programs can be, putting people to work, improving communities that are good for our own Alaskan lifestyle, as well as the visitors who will be coming back here because they're missing us. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and say thank you so much for listening. And I'm sorry again not to be there in person, but I appreciate your interest in this topic.